This is hour 5 of our 5-hour live stream celebrating the first anniversary of our work to rid the world of apostasy laws, like the death penalty for changing your mind about God. In this segment, I speak with Zara K., founder of Faithless Hijabi, and therapist Aisha Khan. We talk about the need for mental health support in the ex-Muslim community and how Faithless Hijabi offers free and discounted therapy worldwide to those who left Islam. We discuss the emotional demands of being an activist, the importance of therapists having their own support systems, and how Faithless Hijabi runs with nearly zero overhead, ensuring donations go directly to therapy. Zara and Aisha explain why ex-Muslim organizations struggle to get grants due to stigma, what anxiety really is and the purpose it serves, and the extra challenges women face from misogyny, especially in Muslim contexts. We also cover how therapy training and licensing vary worldwide, how to spot unethical practices, and how to find a therapist that's a good fit. As Zara says, finding a therapist is like dating. This conversation deepened my appreciation for the emotional side of our work and the systems we need to build to support it. I think it'll do the same for you. Watch the rest of the series, sign the manifesto, and get involved. Links are in the description. Let's get into it. Hello. How you doing, Zara?
Hi. Good, thanks. How are you?
Good, good, good. We're still waiting for Aisha, right? Or
Yes.
yeah, we can wait a little bit for her. So what do you think of this so far? Were you able to see any of it, or you were
I
busy?
I saw the start, but I've had a long day. So I've been up since like 7 a.m. And
I don't know what time it is for you.
it's 9 p.m.
Oh, that is long. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mine feels like a long day already. I noticed my brain's not working like it did in the first 3 hours.
We'll just have a chat wherever me and Aisha can take over.
I got to do a lot better about taking notes because what happens is I have an idea and I forget it right away. In the first 3 hours, I wasn't.
But yeah,
Uh,
no, it's tiring. It's a long one as well, and they're different topics, so it can be tiring. But hopefully this one will be a bit more entertaining, casual.
Hi, Aisha.
Hi, how are you?
Good, good, good. I'm glad you can make it,
No
both of
worries.
you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So we have with us Zara K and Aisha. Is it Khan or Khan?
Khan.
Khan. Okay. And you guys are here because, well, what I envisioned for what this is um Faithless Hijabi, which is an organization Zara started. One of the things you do, a big thing you do now, is therapy for ex-Muslims, some of which is free to the ex-Muslims because of funding you get. And we wanted a therapist with us, and Zara isn't one, so that's why Aisha is here. And you have your own organization. What is the name of that one?
So after faith?
After Faith. And you also do therapy for ex-Muslims,
Yeah, so
maybe different contexts, but
yeah,
right.
so I am a therapist. I run my own private practice. Yeah.
Oh, so it's just you then, rather than multiple.
Yes. Yeah. So I don't work for an organization. I'm sort of self-employed, and I see ex-Muslims who are looking for therapy directly.
Yeah. So I guess my first question for both of you is why you, well, in Zara's case, why did you start your organization? And then maybe also why did you want to do the therapy aspect of it?
Yeah, so we started the charity or the ideation of the charity in around 2018. And I was in Australia at the time, where I think I was just very recently newly ex-Muslim as well, like maybe a year plus or something. I guess there's no exact date sometimes. And one of the key aspects, like, being Australian as well, was that there was no representation for women like myself in the public arena or like a registered organization. I mean, there are atheist and humanist organizations, but they weren't focused on Muslim voices or like people from Muslim backgrounds as well, even in the context of, being an atheist or a humanist. And there was this big gap and nobody wanted to talk about it. So I guess it was out of personal curiosity to basically, get more women's voices out there. maybe a bit of self-healing as well as I start reading these, I guess it was a storytelling platform. So as I start reading a lot of these stories and just thinking about how sheltered I've been from the world and how different women have it differently as well. So we started with like an advocacy group, um, and more storytelling geared towards women's experiences of leaving Islam, from different countries, especially anonymously because they're not safe to do so. And then I guess during COVID, around 2020, when online therapy was being a bit more popularized than before, and I think especially more accepted than it was before, that's when, I was figuring out, okay, well, are we able to take this model and provide support to people outside the UK where they don't know the therapist, they don't know who to connect with, but need support? And that's how we kind of started. Like I was taking therapy and other ex-Muslims were taking therapy at a clinic, and I just started the collaboration with them to basically test out how can we work this out? Like what do we need in place to provide support to different people, especially in countries like Egypt, for instance. You can't actually go and tell people that, hey, you don't believe. And then also, how does funding work? Like, how can people from countries like Egypt support UK-based session rates and actually have a trusted professional to support them through their healing journey? So that was the logistics that kind of led to actually starting the mental health program. And then I came across Aisha's profile years later.
So, Aisha, how about you?
So I've been a trained therapist since around 2012. So I trained as a therapist sort of in the UK, so via the NHS, so the route back then. So working with generic depression, anxiety. At the same time, I was going through my own ex-Muslim journey. So in sort of 2015, I sort of spoke to my family, let them know I'm not a Muslim anymore, and dealt with everything that came with that. And it was around sort of maybe 2 years later, and another ex-Muslim friend of mine actually said, why do you not offer therapy to other people? Because, at the time I had been looking for a therapist and I didn't come across anyone. Didn't find Zara's service at that time, probably would have been helpful. But yeah, sort of there was nothing around that time for me. So after I kind of felt ready to do that, because, I was in the middle of my own journey, and I think maybe we'll speak about that later as well, in terms of therapists who have their own stuff and working with people who have similar difficulties. But yeah, so I, in 2020, decided to start After Faith, and offer the service. And I now work with sort of religious trauma more generally as well. So I do have some people who are actually still within religious communities, but a large percentage of my clients are ex-Muslims. So that's how I sort of came to start After Faith.
Let's see. It's a little bit hard for me to think of questions because I'm thinking of both of you, and you have different things going on, different histories.
Actually, I had a question for Aisha. I think you
Yeah.
just touched on it, like, going through the journey yourself and then also supporting people going through that journey. I was curious to understand a bit more of that process from like being secure with, your position to then support and not be affected by other people's trauma or the support that they need.
Yeah. So I think timing is really sort of important. So when my friend suggested it, I would have been a terrible therapist if I'd done it then, being completely honest, because I was really not in a good place myself with the whole journey. So it took years for me to sort of, from, 5 years exactly, from sort of speaking to my parents to starting the service. And even now, it's been 5 years of running After Faith. And I would say, now when I see my clients, what's really important is that I don't put my own experiences onto them. And I think that's something that goes for all therapists, regardless of what we work with, because yes, whilst I am an ex-Muslim, and I think that's a lot of the reasons why people come to me, right? Because they kind of like, oh, you've been through it and you'll get it. And I absolutely will get the general theme around it. But what's really important for me, and what I am always really conscious of not doing, is sort of, well, this happened to me, and that's what, that's going to happen to you, because everyone is different. We all have different parents and different families, communities, etc. So I think for me, it's experience. I've been a therapist for a long time, so I'm very conscious of not putting my own biases onto the person that I'm working with. And I have supervision, so if things were to come up for me, I would access supervision, or I'd go back to therapy myself if I needed to. But I'm very conscious that when I'm with someone, my part is to help them in their journey.
I really like the idea of therapists also seeing a therapist as well, because you're not as alone in that journey. Because there's, I'm sure, a lot like with your clients, but also in your personal life that kind of comes up,
Of course.
and then you're like, I need to just like have another person listen to me and make it about me at this point.
Yeah, I think that's important. And also, I don't know what it's like with your service, Sarah, in terms of, I know you are sort of, probably depends on funding, right? But sort of people might come to me for maybe 6 sessions, they'll finish, and then a year later they get in touch again, because the journey's ongoing, right? It's sort of leaving faith or religious trauma. It's not something you're like, okay, I'm done, and now this isn't ever going to be an issue for me again. If only it was that easy. So I do see people come back sort of through the years, and I'm just wondering, does your service sort of operate in a similar way, or is there limitations around that?
No, so personally for me, I have like you said, it's an ongoing journey. So I also have like therapy myself, like every year for like about like 2 months or
You get a discount?
whatnot. I don't do it through the same therapist, so I can't work. I mean, I wish I could, but I guess it feels a bit unfair because the therapists already give us discounted rates because these are people who are students and they can't afford it or live at home, and I earn. So it just feels a bit unfair to like take advantage of that.
And I was totally kidding.
No, I know that would be good. I know some people do come up to me, like not ex-Muslims, they're like, we get discounted sessions, and I'm like, would you sell your rates discounted as well if you're working? Like it's not fair. But one of the things that, and two topics with the discount, that's actually a good one. I'll highlight on it, not in a different way, but with Faithless Hijabi, we have very, very limited funding. Like right now, it's shut, right? Like it'll take months for us to then crowdfund. We don't have this continuous source of income, and that's also because we're such a small group of people trying to keep it running, and all the money goes into paying therapists at a very, very reduced rate. Like the therapists have been really, really kind to us, and I definitely don't want to take advantage of like not paying or asking for pro bono. So there's limited funding. We always encourage people, if you can pay, please do pay. And they offer discount services or like discounted sessions if you are a student and you can pay. But if you can't pay, we will, depending on the funding, we'll always contact you when we have funding. And then some people need extended sessions. Sometimes the therapist will highlight, hey, I don't think this person's done yet after 12 sessions. And then it again depends on the funding. Like I can't promise like, yeah, we'll have funding in a month and then not have that. Or like having to put in my own money into it because we're already working so many hours just to keep the governance up, but even processes and any compliance that we need to do as a charity. So we do have some people who need extended sessions, some people who come back, and if their therapist is happy to take them back and they're able to fund their own sessions, then that's entirely up to them. And sometimes therapists are like, hey, I can't give it to you on low cost sessions, so do you mind paying a bit more? And that is, I guess, at the discretion of the therapist if they feel like they can take that person on. But on the I guess discounted session, one of the organizations or the clinics that I've worked with is called Trauma Treatment International. And this was just a unique opportunity that kind of landed between like with Faithless Hijabi. It's basically an organization that only partners with other organizations supporting people at war. And one of the CEO's goal in that other organization was to support organization leaders who work with like high risk cases. Because while mental health is one of the main programs, I was previously involved in like emergency assistance and relocation and like getting people out of the country. And it was really stressful. It was like you would be awake and you're like, has the Saudi girl gotten out of her house? Has she gone to the airport? Has she flown? Has she stopped? Is she back home? Like there were so many like different factors, and that was really stressful for me. So that's where this other organization was not only helping like the high risk asylum seekers or people who have come out of war, but also, I guess, me in how I cope and process a lot of the people that I was helping, but also the intake. When we start referring people, just to get to know a bit more, because we need to do ID checks. We need to verify that, this person is who they are, even though the legal contract lies between the therapist and the person. We're still taking a risk here by referring both. And that means as a charity, we need to have the records clean, or like, the records set, and really work through making sure that are we collecting the right information? Do we have statistics enough to even prove that, we want to apply for a small fund or a grant? And it could be like £1,000 grant. And essentially that doesn't cover a lot of sessions or for a lot of people. And we're still like squeezing out. But we try collecting the data that we can, like within the bounds of like confidentiality and not digging deeper. But then I guess the therapists take over and they work with the person in identifying, can they support them or are they not the right fit? And sometimes it does happen where we're like, I don't think I can help this person. And then we check in with the person and then see if there's another therapist, or if we're like, hey, you're too high risk. You're not in a safe space. You've canceled multiple sessions. And I understand you have a lot going on, but we're also paying a therapist and there are other people like waiting. So we need to kind of end this relationship that we have. But if things change, let us know. So that's kind of like in a nutshell of like how we operate.
Can I add something about your organization?
Mm.
I learned about this in meeting with Zara, I don't know, a few months ago. The context was like, I would like to volunteer for that organization. And what I learned was some really interesting things. Usually when you hear about nonprofits and the funding they get, there's a percentage of that money that goes towards overhead. And sometimes it's a lot, making it completely useless, the whole organization. For you, all the funding you get, 0% of it goes to overhead, 100% of it goes to actually paying the therapist to do the work. And then
I
on
want to
top of,
say
go ahead.
I want to say 99.5%. I
Okay.
keep a 5% buffer just for any documentation. Or if somebody's like, hey, I don't have internet to do therapy, can you help me get it? And we're like, we really don't support this, but I want you to get the help. So I can pay for a package. And sometimes it come out of pocket, but like that rarely happens. But sometimes it'll just be like $100 a year that we would spend on like our website and everything, just to make sure that us as activists are not continuously spending money on it, but also there's like some accountability with like our accounts that comes out from that 0.5%.
So everybody watching, if you have some money and you want to help, please donate to Faithless Hijabi. Go to faithlesshijabi. Is it .com or .org?
.org.
.org. And there's a dedicated page for the donations aspect of it. And I'll have a link later in the description of this video. Yeah, so I just wanted to say that real quick. Did you guys have something else you were still talking about?
No, but I think that's an interesting aspect because that also instills a bit more confidence in people who are donating as well, who are like, okay, where am I donating to? And is it going to the people that I'm trying to support as well? Or are you spending most of this money on like, other things? Like I built my website from scratch. I couldn't, that was like, I'm not affording a website designer. I'm like, I'll learn how to do this. I'll do that. I'll do that. So that's also one of the reasons why maybe we're not applying for bigger grants or grants that we tried so much, spent hours and then get multiple rejections. I mean, I think also when we list Islam or like when we write ex-Muslims and apostasy, a lot of people don't know the impact of it. They just equate it to like other atheists. They don't realize the dangers, or also they're like, and I think I've heard this actually through somebody that was helping us as an organization apply, was like, we can't support ex-Muslims because then it looks like we're against Muslims. And that is in a country like Sweden. And I'm like, for people who are like mostly atheist and agnostic, for you to see it this way is one, like disappointing, but two, it just tells you how much harder it is.
Maybe what they meant was you would have to support all ex religions.
But they don't have, I guess they don't like, I guess in Sweden, it isn't a huge group of ex-religious people. There are people, mostly from cults. But I think it was more around the moment we're writing ex-Muslim, like as a term, it's already hostile. I wonder if Aisha, like when you talk about your work, you kind of get that, you know, people who've never been like ex-Muslims or Muslims, so you get that friction of like, why do you guys need support? Or like, what does that mean?
I think what I've noticed is other therapists and sort of professionals are really wary of speaking about these struggles because, there's a lot of, rightly so, kind of talk about Islamophobia, especially in the UK within the NHS, right? This is like everywhere in the NHS about prejudice against Muslims. So when you then have a therapist who's like, actually, have you considered prejudice against ex-Muslims? And of course, we are even more a minority. And people are like, what's that? And I think people are so worried, as especially professionals, as being branded as being Islamophobic, that they're like, we don't want to talk about this, right? We don't want to talk about ex-Muslims and supporting that. And I think that makes it really difficult because a lot of, again, in the UK, the first port of call for a lot of people to access therapy is via these services, right? And people will come to me and say, they just didn't have a clue what these problems were. And it'd be interesting to kind of hear about any training your therapists get, because what I've noticed is that professionals here that I've came across, and I've even had to sort of provide supervision and be like, that's not helpful. They will be like, oh, well, have they considered going to speak to someone religious to try and help guide them back into religion? And I'm like, I think you're misunderstanding the issue, right? And again, this is because of the way that we're trained here is, if a Muslim comes seeking therapy in the NHS and they're sort of struggling with, I don't know, maybe OCD is extreme because the religious element, it's like, then, yeah, maybe, that person is actively saying, I am religious. So yes, let's bring their religion into it and help them through it. But what they're therefore here is when someone's like, oh, I'm not religious, is, oh, well, it's the same thing, let's get you to speak to these religious figures in the community. And what happens? They drop out of therapy, right? They're like, well, this person really doesn't get it. So I think there's so much, a real lack of information amongst professionals. And I do think part of that is the fear of being branded as being anti-Muslim or Islamophobic, etc., which does make it, I think, really difficult for people to get the right support when they are ex-Muslims.
Yeah, I think when I first took therapy, it's like somebody was kind of leaving religion or had left, and I had a lot of anxiety, not because of that. There were like other things, and this was an accumulation of it. Um, my GP, this was in Australia, so my GP gave me referrals to like 3 people. He's like, this. And I read the first name, which is like, like a Muslim name. And I was like, I think I'm gonna go with this just because I'm still leaving. Like I'm not sure, but I need that cultural connection. Worst mistake ever. I mean, not in a like horrible way, but it was just when it was in Australia, it's super expensive. And then two, it was Ramadan, and I was in a session and I wasn't fasting, and I was talking about how, you know, I was overwhelmed by the information, like finding out like the negativity in Islam and talking to my therapist about it. And, the discussion turned into communism and other toxic ideologies or like other ideologies that could be bad, but it's not all bad. And I'm like, what? Or like, I said something and he said, yeah, touch wood. And I was like, I don't think I can come here again because I didn't notice it before because I thought he was a very open-minded, but obviously like Ramadan brings out different things, but also like I guess to a point that he tried separating himself, but at that point that was a clear, I can't work with you. And I just went like, yeah, I'm not going to be coming anymore. I didn't even want to give the feedback because I was really scared about like that confrontation. But yeah, no, it has happened like, in personal experience where you're like, sometimes there is a trust and people can hold it if they're able to like separate it. But a lot of us, and maybe rightfully so, are very scared to like, how open can we be? Um, I guess with training and Faithless Hijabi, so the therapist we work with now came from the same clinic that I was at. So they do a lot of the vetting, etc., checking insurances and whatnot. And this was like 5 years ago. And then we had the select few because I guess they have they have like 80 therapists. So we had the select few that did work with, like, that did want to continue working as, part of helping us as a charity. And there, at the time when we started, they had an ex-Muslim supervisor to talk about this issue because we were taking therapy there as ex-Muslims. It was like, I think they were just, I don't know if they were starting up, but they were starting a new initiative at the time. So there was like an ex-Muslim supervisor. So that was one. And then others had taken the faith to faithless training. And then every now and then, sometimes the therapist, would ask me, they're like, what does this mean to you? Like, what does this aspect of like guilt and shame and hell mean to you? So I can only explain it in my way, but like, usually if there is a new therapist, we would have like a yearly sync or we would talk about, the type of clients we have. And, sometimes someone has never worked with ex-Muslim and they're like, I'm not sure I'm the right person for it. And I've always been encouraging, but we've had so good results with like, let's talk about like 2 therapists I have in mind. People have just loved their methods, like despite not having that cultural background. And I always explain it when we have people where like we have like 1 or 2 ex-Muslim therapists, but they might not be available. This is the other person we have, or there's an option. I think it's worked out really, really well for like sometimes people are like, I don't want anybody from a Muslim background. I just want somebody to be completely outside of all of this and help me. And sometimes it's not even always religious trauma related. Sometimes it's boundaries with family. Sometimes it's clashes. Sometimes it's anxiety and depression that, kind of is covered, or like it starts with like leaving Islam, but like there's a lot more to it and starting to uncover a lot of the different things with a therapist that doesn't necessarily share the same experiences, but is able to support them to identify, what is really happening and how to cope. So I think so far it's been really, really good. Maybe sometimes we'll have early on, people are like, I don't think this therapy style is for me. Do you have other suggestions? I think only once or twice somebody's like, after 10 sessions, not even early on, like, I need a change in therapist. And I'm like, well, you have 2 sessions left. Changing something now makes no sense because we can't pay more unless you want to pay the additional. And they're like, yep, it wasn't really beneficial. And I'm like, after 10 sessions, like I would expect, like, early on where you're like, this isn't for me. And some people recognize that. Some people are not ready to take therapy. And then they're just like, I tried this, it was helpful, but I'm not ready right now, or maybe I don't need therapy right now. But for the most part, I feel like maybe just getting any support, because sometimes they're in emergency situations and we're like, well, we can't help you get out of your country. But if you have a safe space and you still want to talk about, like, some of the things that bring you anxiety, we have this option if you're willing to commit to it and try this out. And it really helps. And some people didn't recognize how much they needed that.
Yeah, and I think you've made a really good point there, Zara, about how not everyone will always be ready for therapy, and especially when people are actually living in quite hostile environments where it would be unsafe for them to openly show who they are, because anxiety in those situations is actually completely natural, right? And I've had people kind of come to me and be like, oh, I don't want to feel anxious anymore. But when you kind of describe where you live, the environment, well, actually anxiety it's something that we have to keep us safe, right? Like if we are literally have an attacker about to attack us, anxiety will kick in and it'll help us get the hell out of there, or fight off, etc. And the same applies in our living circumstances, that actually if we are around people who are abusive emotionally or physically, then yeah, that anxiety serves a purpose there. It's kind of stopping us from sharing things that could bring us harm. And that doesn't mean don't access therapy, but I think there's a discussion that I have with people about actually anxiety is a normal response here. By all means, we can come and talk through it and have that safe space for you to be able to share with someone what you're going through, and that in itself can be very helpful to some people. And I think that's why it's really important to, when people do come for therapy, to kind of ask them what they're hoping to get out of it and make sure that they are in the right place to actually work towards that as well.
Which from what I understand, that's part of how you guys are trained, right? Is to sort of start the whole thing with, what are your goals? You ask the patient, what are your goals for the therapy? I mean, not everything, but for the therapy. So that you can try to actually achieve those goals or help them achieve those goals.
I realized
Yeah,
I was on mute.
absolutely.
I was aiding to your joke. I was like, yeah, ask about your life goals, career goals, fitness goals. I mean, sometimes those are overlapping because then you're like, I can't have any life goals because I'm in this.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, and I think one of the things, about, the program being, available to everyone globally and, people still taking it while they're in that situation has been the transparency that I get from therapists. Not on like every session, it's more like if there's a problem or if they're like, hey, I've been working with this person for 6 sessions and I don't see them improving. And I think we've tried and it just feels like they need to get out of this situation. So I've recommended like, this is your local contacts. Maybe they'll never contact, their emergency center in like the Middle East, but they'll try putting together a plan and just giving me a heads up. So I'll do a check-in, but also really maintaining my boundaries here because I'm not the therapist and I am basically just asking how they're doing. And that initially for me was really hard, like not the therapy part, but like is there anything I can do to help you to get out of the situation? And then taking it on myself. And that took and that took me therapy to go like, where are my boundaries? What am I doing? Is it my role to like make sure that this person is like completely safe, like, outside that situation? Or is it just my role to limit my effort to like, this is what I'm trying to do. This person can help you, and this is my role in like defining it into like, I'll be here if you have questions. I'm not your therapist. So usually when we do like intake calls, some people are like, I've been going through this, I've been going through that. And I'm like, I understand. I just want to highlight I'm not your therapist. I'm happy to listen, but I also don't want you to open up about something that's painful, especially because I can't provide you the support when that, when that emotions start rising up as you're talking about it. But also protecting myself from like things that I'm not ready to hear, things that I am not equipped to handle as well, and really identifying the limitations of, what support I can provide, but also keeping in, I guess, even just embedding the idea that like, I'm only here to help facilitate this, but the real help is from people who are trained. And sometimes initially that was hard to like go like, but I want to help, but it's not my job. I'm not the right person. I could be doing more damage than actually like support.
Just a question, Zara. I'm just curious because I know you do the intake calls without obviously speaking about anyone in particular. I'm just wondering if you've picked up a theme of when it is that people seek support. Is it a specific obstacle or a time in their life, or does it just vary?
It varies, but for women, it's a lot about family. It's a lot about restrictions. It's a lot about the disappointment and burden they take upon themselves. And I guess there are some themes that I try to connect is, I guess, the misogyny really comes out in different ways. It really comes out for them in different ways. It could be from like, they're in university right now and they're like so stressed out because they've had this, they've had to like do so much more than their brothers. And that comes out in anxiety and stress, or or like abuse. And it could be like sexual abuse, assault by their family members and the brother. And then a lot of the times, I think for men, it has been just around anxiety. It's just like there's a fear of being caught and like being found, but not, I guess, not the treatment that they've been facing ever since they were young. I don't know if that makes sense. Like women carry a lot more of like that childhood. I mean, some men do, but women carry a lot more of like that systematic, I guess, oppression or discrimination. And then that comes out very differently. And for men, it's more like, I'm scared if my family find out. I don't know how to cope with this. Or sometimes it's relationship issues. Like, I don't know how to be in a relationship because I come from such a toxic family. But I mean, I guess most of it is like with fear, but I see the theme with women being a bit more than just the now. It's a lot about the past, but a lot to do with them being women. What about you?
Thank you. That's really interesting because I think it's a bit different for me. So, anxiety and fear, I think, are always present, right? But it's usually, in my experience, when people are in relationships and they're at that point where it's like, I want to take my relationship to the next stage. Like, I want to get married, or I want to have children, or we are having children, like I'm now pregnant. And it's like, now what do I do? So it's kind of almost at that point where I can't move forward with my life unless I take the step and tell my family. So it's almost kind of feels like a last resort that like, now I'll come to therapy and try and help me kind of get through this. And I think you're right about kind of for men and women it is different, because I think for men, being very general here, obviously not everyone, they do have slightly more freedom with the partner that they can choose. Whereas the women that I see, they've already kind of had talks and there's tighter restrictions, and maybe they don't live away from home, so actually they want to take the step of moving in with their partner, but that's the conversation that they need to have. But yeah, I think for me, I've noticed it's usually kind of they're really stuck about moving forward in their lives, and it's which way do you go, right? Do you kind of put your life on hold, or do you kind of do the really hard thing and speak to family.
Yeah, I mean, I just picked up on the themes as you asked me, and I was thinking about all the form re responses I've read and how women reacted, like, you know, when we were talking. And it always really, like, from my non-professional opinion, it always really has to do with like the past holding them back a lot more. And, you know, the abuse or like, you know, so just the misogyny they faced or like,
Mm.
and it could be the smallest comment that somebody makes now that reminds them of like the past. Or like the stress and anxiety before exams for a student. And then talking about nightmares and how that creates nightmares from them being at home in a religious environment and, you know, not being able to study. And then that all, you know, I do feedbacks and follow-ups if they're open to it, just to get like a testimonial, but also just to kind of understand, is this the right therapist for you? Just so I know more. And then sometimes it's more like, you know, they do give me this update, like I didn't even realize that this was part of what was holding me back. Or some of them were like, I couldn't even imagine having a different life than what I did like before the therapy. Like everything was just so shut off. And then, you know, just having somebody validate that like it's completely normal to feel how I do, it's completely normal to make my own choices. Um, but yeah, I think maybe I don't. I mean, we have like 27% men, not a lot, but I think it's a good number and it's been increasing now. But a lot of them, I think many of them are asylum seekers. So their approach to, you know, normal is a bit, or like the general anxiety is a bit different because they're like they're not resettled yet. They're maybe refugees or, you know, finding it hard to cope being out of danger as well. But yeah, so maybe I don't know enough, but I know with women, like there's a lot of like being held
Mm.
back.
If I was to make a claim about that, yeah, it's much harder for women than men, not just a bit, like you said. I think you were toning that down. But of course, there are some men that have it worse than some women. But on average, yeah, women have it way worse. I mean, even in the U.S., if you're born and raised in the U.S. but with like Muslim parents, even in a very liberal family, you're still gonna have lots of misogyny. I imagine there's ones that are way better, but I'm kind of speaking of my own experience in this case. And I have a sister, and I've heard what she said about things. Yeah, she had it harder than us, the boys. It was 4 boys and a girl. She had it much harder. Um, and and of course, all of that I just said is it's a little sliver of what people deal with in the other countries or in a very non-liberal, very authoritarian family. I can't imagine what people deal with. You just said a bunch of things. I've never experienced any of that stuff. Not saying I've never had anxiety, but not about any of those issues. you know,
I
wow.
think that's how I felt when I started Faithless Hijabi and I was hearing those stories as well. I felt very privileged to be, I mean, yes, I was in Australia, but my family was in Tanzania, which is very similar to the Middle East, except for like constitution, you know, barring women from other things, but like the community, like very strict, very like even more religious than, you know, peers outside from the same community or like people from the same community who've gone outside have it a bit more strict as well. It was very community bound. And when I was in Australia, just listening to how the government supports these restrictions on women and how, you know, there were this strict, very strong opinions that their fathers or brothers had about when they should go out, who they should be friends with, even girls, or like homeschooling, um, or never going out alone, you know, not being able to have friends outside the same religious group. Um, it was very hard for me to absorb, like, this really happens. And then even sharing it with my brother or my sibling, and I'm like, guys, do you know, like, you know, this is a story that came to me, and they're like, oh, it's just one bad family. And I'm like, no, no, no. This is coming from like different areas. I mean, sure, it's the few families, but like there is a common theme here. And that, I mean, yes, we're so lucky that, you know, our parents weren't as religious. I mean, they were, but it was very relative to like, you know, like the abuse part. Um, so I did feel very, very privileged, even as a woman, to be able to like not face that. Yeah, that was just the additional, as you were talking about the liberal and the authoritarian families.
Do you guys want to get into? There's something we plan to discuss related to, you know, therapy. What is a therapist? What's a good therapist? What's a bad therapist? Unethical therapy. And then recently, you guys emailed me and talked about how in the UK, the requirements for what gets counted as a therapist is I don't know what bad. I don't know what else to compare it to. I don't know what it's like in the US either. My guess is the whole world is at the level of the UK. I don't really know that.
In Sweden, it's a bit more strict. You need 7 years of study before you can practice. So you'd have to complete your bachelor's, you'd have to do supervised hours, and then you can only do your master's in psychology if you've completed a bachelor's in psychology, unlike other fields where you can do others. And then you still have additional hours to be supervised before you can practice. I think UK, maybe Aisha, you know a bit more.
Yeah. So I'm just curious, because so I guess in the UK there's a real therapist who does all the things you've just said, but basically anyone can advertise themselves as a therapist. So basically it's perfectly legal for someone who's works in a completely different industry to be like, okay, I'm going to start a website tomorrow and say that I'm a therapist. So are there restrictions against that in Sweden? Would that be completely sort of illegal to do?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, you can call yourself a coach,
Yeah.
like a life coach, but not a therapist. You would have to have some form of licensing in Australia as well. Um, the people that have come from ex-religious background who wanted to work with us, they were they were coaches, but didn't have the certification that Australia would recognize, and I can't remember the body right now. Unfortunately, we were like, we can't pay for that, but if somebody needs
Okay.
those kind of services, that would have to be them reaching out to you.
Sure.
And then for the therapists that we do have come from the clinics who have been certified, vetted, and they're from different levels. So people who've done their masters and maybe more supervision work at level 7. I don't exactly understand the UK, but at bare minimum, it's level 4 that the therapists that we have, and they're more senior, and that's how we kept in touch with them ongoingly. And some of them have taken like specific trauma courses that lasted for like 10 to 12 months, I think, with the dissertation. So there are also referrals from other ex-Muslim therapists who went to those trauma courses and are supporting, other ex-Muslims, and then getting referrals from like, hey, I did a course with this person and they might be interested in supporting the charity as well. And then I think from Faithless Hijabi's perspective, we just do our due diligence by asking, do you have the right insurance? Because then you're having the legal contract with the client.
Yeah.
We're just helping pay for the bill.
Yeah.
So whatever you invoice us has to be in your systems and our systems, and we have like the financial record of doing that. And then the other, I guess the Arabic clinic, same thing. They're from a clinic. And then they do specify if somebody is a trainee versus somebody that is qualified. So if somebody is in Lebanon, like, because the clinic is in Lebanon, but founded by like a UK-based therapist who's Lebanese. So if somebody is in Lebanon, they have a bit more flexibility with trainees. But if there was an Arabic speaker who was a very complicated case, I always specify, hey, just please make sure that there's a senior therapist that is assigned to this person, because I feel like this case is a bit more complicated or needs a bit more support. And that's something that we understand in the first, I guess, the first intake call, just like, what is happening? Where are you? Like, just basic, but not getting too deep into like, I guess, their goals. We ask like, what are your general goals? Like, what are you hoping to achieve? And some people are like, get out of this country. And I'm like, that's not something we support. Just FYI. And sometimes they'll email the therapist and I'm like, I will email this person and clarify that this is not your job, not your role. You may be able to support them with like a letter saying that you've provided them therapy via this organization, but that's it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And it sounds like, you know, you're doing as much due diligence around that, which is great. And because that's one of my biggest sort of issues with in the UK. Like I said, anyone can advertise themselves as a therapist, and that's completely legal. So it's kind of like how you've described coaching, but therapist here. And I think it makes it really hard is that there's lots of different routes to, so it's not like, oh, just check this qualification. There's lots of legitimate qualifications you can hold and still be a therapist. We do have sort of accrediting bodies, I guess the equivalent of maybe licensing in the USA, but again, it's not a legal requirement. So I am accredited, but I could still practice if I wasn't accredited. So it makes it really hard, I think, for people looking for a therapist in the UK to be like, is this a real therapist, or is this someone who's done like a 1 week Groupon course and they've got a certificate at the end of it to say that they're a therapist. And yeah, I think in the USA, I know you do have to be licensed in the state. So I did do sort of a coaching qualification as well, because I do have USA clients contact me as well because I work online. So I can offer USA coaching, but in the UK, I'm a therapist. So I think I think for anyone who is looking for a therapist, just kind of maybe do your own research. And, you know, I offer everyone a free 15-minute call to kind of find out a bit about me. And I think any decent therapist would probably be willing to speak to someone for that time to make sure that you're happy with their approach as well. But yeah, it sounds like you do all of that for the clients, which I think makes it a lot easier for people.
So I have a question for you guys, or asking you for advice, not for me, but for people watching who are considering getting therapy. What can you tell them? What advice can you give them that would help them judge whether the therapist they're getting is a good therapist, or more generally, whether they have a good fit with that therapist? You already mentioned something. You do a 15-minute call, but like, what can they do? How should they think about it?
Yeah, and I can go first. I mean, I think language is really important because while a lot of people speak English, if you're not very confident in it, and I've had this happen at Faithless Hijabi where somebody's like, you know, in Saudi, and I had the initial call, her English was not great and she demanded an English therapist. I was very uncomfortable providing one, so I like providing a contact for a therapist. So what we did was we asked the Arabic clinic who do speak English to go like, hey, this girl wants you to speak to her in English. And the reason behind it was I can't speak Arabic because my family understands, so I can use a dictionary and translate to English. And I'm like, that's not going to work with therapy. So I think language was one, and maybe I think specifying, like if you're going through a clinic or if you're going through like the charity or people, like specifying your goals and a bit more on your preferences. Because I remember when I was taking therapy, I said no Muslim therapist or no religious therapist. And really, like, it's like with a doctor, like when you go to a gyno, I'm like, you know, if you don't want male gynecologist, you specify that. The more information you give, whether you're looking for it online or going via something, the easier it becomes for them to help support find a good therapist, or a therapist that might be good, um, or identify if they can't support you and that you shouldn't be wasting your time with this. And maybe like if you have experience with other therapists, if you know what you're looking for and what you're not looking for, specific, approaches, like CBT doesn't work for me. And a lot of people have gone like, yeah, but like in this context, I'm like, no, I've tried it 3 different times. I know it doesn't work for me. Like it's not something that it's not that I'm looking for. So whenever that's offered to me by, let's say, like in Sweden, you have like insurances that give you like when you're stressed, you get like this free therapy. I always go against CBT. But yeah, Aisha, what do you think?
Absolutely, I think everything you said is spot on. I am a CBT therapist, so I'll try not to be offended. I'm joking. It's definitely not for everything. It doesn't help everyone's problems. And I think when someone's in therapy, do you feel comfortable? Do you feel like you can share things? If you're kind of sat thinking, oh, they're judging me, or I'm sure we've all had this before. I've had it in therapy, I've had it in supervision, where I barely get a word in. And it's your therapy, right? So you should be given that space to share things, and you should feel like you can be open and you're not worried to hold things back. And yes, building trust might take a few appointments, but if you leave feeling like you were judged, or you couldn't be honest or transparent, or you're concerned about the therapist in any way, that might be an indication that that's not a good fit. I think it's always helpful to, and a good therapist will ask you at the end of the session, how did you find this? Was there anything that wasn't helpful? And that can be an opportunity for you to say, actually, this thing that you said made me uncomfortable. And again, if you don't feel able to say that, that's probably a sign that you don't trust that person, which is the most important thing. There's a thing we say regardless of if we're trained in CBT or EMDR or ACT or whatever we're providing, the most important thing isn't the type of therapy, it's the therapeutic relationship. It's that you feel you can trust your therapist, and you feel they understand you and they're validating what you say. So if you kind of come away feeling that's not there, then that's maybe an indication to kind of think about, you don't have, like you said, Zara, you don't have to stay with someone just because you started with them, right?
And that kind of logic applies to all relationships, in my understanding.
Exactly.
So you might as well develop it with the therapist so that you can then do it correctly with everyone else.
I always say finding a therapist is like dating. You definitely want to find the right fit, and only because, you don't find it on this therapist, or like you've had 2 different experiences, does not mean that you may never find that. Maybe you are looking for specific skill sets, specific practice, or like therapeutic practices. But, my first experience with therapy could have held me back from never getting support. But then I was like, I'm gonna try it. I tried group sessions,
What's the
and
magic number?
I've had like 5 different, but I've moved around a lot. So then there's insurances, there's like, obviously try getting stuff for where my work can cover it or insurance can cover it, but also then location and timing. So when I was in Australia, working with the UK therapist just meant that I would have to wake up really early, or they would have to work really late, or I could get it locally, and the government would subsidize it. So it was a different. I think I've only had a few bad therapists, not even bad. It was like this one person, and then the second was like group therapy just made me feel very, very anxious, because we were all placed in this, and that's usually the primary. Maybe actually you have a different experience, but like when you go to NHS and you're like, I want therapy, they're like, we're gonna put you in group therapy, and then COVID happened, and I just gotten a job, and I'm like, guys, I really need to eat. Like I haven't eaten all day, and I wasn't allowed to eat, so I just stopped therapy because I was like, I'm sorry, I understand it makes the group uncomfortable, but like I've just started working. Like this is my lunchtime and my work time and like therapy time. So like I don't have more to give. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I
I
mean
think I've
that's
tried to, yeah, it
that's
was
not
hard.
good.
And then she was like, come in for a session because people felt like you left too abruptly. And I'm like, I actually don't want to be in this uncomfortable situation to now explain how, I mean, I understand that I shouldn't be eating, but like, I'm sorry, like, I have to prioritize one thing. And I think maybe group therapy isn't for me. But yeah, I think it
Yeah.
was like trying and really finding out like, what format is for me and who is my person is who I can, like Aisha said, like feel comfortable with and share with and get the right support.
And it's funny you likened it to different types of relationships, because I think you can also outgrow therapists. So I've worked with as a therapist with clients where we've both kind of mutually agreed, and I've said, look, I feel like I've helped you as much as I can at this point, and I've kind of suggested, but if it's a relationship problem, I will actively say, I think you actually need a couples therapist now. I can't provide that service. I think you need to go and find someone who does specialize in that area. So it's for some people, yes, it's one therapist you'll see for years, you'll have breaks, you'll come back to, but also I think part of being a good therapist is knowing your limitations, right? So at some point your therapist might say to you, look, this is no longer something I can help you with, but what I would recommend is someone who's trained in this type of therapy, or someone who can help you with this, and they can sort of aid you to look for someone. So yeah, it might be that even if you have had a really great therapist and you've done lots of good work, you might start to think this isn't really helping anymore. That's okay.
It's kind of the same with physicians. You might have a main physician, you have a general practitioner, and when it gets out of his field, he or she sends you to an expert in that field. It makes sense that therapy would be the same.
I think my one maybe tip or personal experience on like finding a good therapist is I've never really found therapists provided by the government like fully funded to be good, because there's limitation of choices. Or like in Sweden, it's like 25-minute therapy, and I'm like, I don't know how to connect with you in 25 minutes. Or, there were these limitations and whatnot. It had to be like, me searching around and willing to pay out of pocket to basically get the therapist that I wanted. And for me personally, like I love Swedish people, but we are very different cultures. Like it's very different. Like UK therapists, white therapists, no issues. It could be language, it could be yeah, like yes, with me, like Swedish therapists did not work. We were just thinking on very different elements. Well, they were trying to be sympathetic. We just had to focus on different things. So we focused on like ADHD instead, on like, focus and coping mechanisms with like, getting distracted versus digging deeper into trauma. So I had to go back to like a UK-based therapist and like not funded, etc. And that's what kind of, made the difference, like the culture part for some people. And it works fine when the therapist isn't Muslim at all. But there's a certain different style in different countries as well. And from what I heard from one of the American therapists that I had who was working with us and is now in academic teaching, so he had to step away. He was struggling, like when we first chatted, he was struggling with helping his peers explain how to work with minorities or different minorities while he was not a Muslim, but he had worked in Iraq, etc. And he was like from an Asian, like East Asian background. And he was just getting so much resistance from his peers on like, but you don't know their experience, so you can't really help them. Um,
Well,
and the people I referred to him, they were happy. Everything was great. But I guess it was the American culture of like, but maybe they should go to people like them who look like them. Or maybe you don't know enough experience, or maybe you're minimizing. There's a lot of political tantrums happening in that room from the feedback that he was telling me and why he wanted to work, supporting ex-Muslims as well. Like, just kind of like, I guess, putting his experience like working in Iraq and Afghanistan in practice.
Yeah, and I think you're right, because I know a lot of people do have that. Like people come to me, right, because they're like, you're ex-Muslim and you get it. But, I've also helped people over the years who've had like fertility problems. I've never had them myself, but that's part of being a therapist is, I have empathy. I can understand how things must be for you. And, I'm willing to learn, like, tell me about your experience, which is no different to when I work with ex-Muslims, like, tell me your experience, right? That's what therapy is about. And I think, like you say, for people who might be watching this thinking, I have to see someone who gets it and who's been through it, I think that's not necessarily true. I think there's a lot of great therapists out there who, I saw like a white therapist who didn't have any sort of idea about, she didn't know much about Islam at all. But she kind of got the whole family dynamics and, I was able to explain, and I found that really, really helpful. So I think it's really important sort of when looking for a therapist that, like you say, especially in the UK, like you on the NHS, you have no choice. You kind of get what you're given, right? Like, this is your therapist. And there are bad therapists, but like with any job, there are bad people in all jobs, but there's some really great therapists in the NHS as well. And I think, again, it's about sort of giving them a chance, and maybe our bias as clients, right? Oh, they're not going to get it because they've not been through it. So we go in quite closed off. But actually, if we give people a chance, a lot of therapists probably will sort of be able to understand, and you'll be able to explain it to them. So yeah, I think it's definitely, choices is the key thing here, but being willing to try different things as well.
I also think like be willing to spend money. Like don't treat therapy as like I need to be stingy, so I'm going to use an app. And I'm sure there are therapists on the app that are cheaper and better, but this is somebody's living wage. Like I know as a charity we get the discounts, but that is also because we're a charity and they're also doing their like I guess pro bono or like supporting us to the extent that they can. But this is somebody's job. And this is also your mental health, which could really impact everything else. Like, your career, like if you're having anxiety and stress and like you're taking that with you to work versus actually getting the support you need, you're just denying like, it's like your arm's hurting and we feel that physical pain and you're going to work and you're like, yeah, I'm just going to work with my right hand. It is very similar. So maybe I think just be willing to spend instead of, kind of denying that or like trying to find low cost or cheap, especially if you can afford it, of course. Like,
Yeah.
I'm a big advocate for like not just women, like people getting fair wages, but also like people having the mindset that like it's just therapy. Like maybe I don't need to spend more, or maybe like it's too expensive. It's not important for me right now and I can delay it. But even if you don't have a lot of money, try setting like a few sessions in mind. Just go like, what can I get out of it? Maybe my money is wasted and nothing, or maybe I'm understanding a bit more about myself. So when I have a bit more, I can start doing this again. It's like going to the gym as well. Like you need to work out, so you're going to spend on the gym. You need to eat, so you're going to spend on food. It is part of like, I guess you being healthy and you investing in yourself. It's really like, I don't buy expensive dresses, but there are people who will buy expensive dresses and then like spend like 10% of what you bought that dress for into therapy because you don't value it enough to see how important it can be. Not for everybody, but it can be very important. So like be willing to invest in yourself.
And there are stigmas or cultural issues causing some of that thinking, right?
I think so, but
Downplaying the concept of therapy as valuable.
I'm actually I'm I'm actually seeing the current generation, like the younger generation, being more open to it. But at the same time, like the fact that we have like over 27% men from Muslim communities wanting therapy and being open to it, I think like it's going in a positive way. Maybe
Yeah, for sure.
so I definitely think like, and you talking about this and you bringing up this topic, I don't know why my camera is moving, but like you talking about this and you bringing about this as a male is also like going against everything that we were raised with.
By the way, I'll be clear. I've had therapy and I loved it both times that I did it. It wasn't related to religion. It was very good. Yeah. And I remember one of the times that I did it, and it was BetterHelp.com, and they give you a form to fill out with a bunch of questions. One of them is, do you prefer somebody of a particular religion? What religion? Atheist or no preference? And I went with no preference. I don't know if that was right, but I went with no preference. And then I did the therapy. It was like 4 sessions, and I don't know what religion she was, if she was one, had one. But if I was to make a guess, I'd say atheist. I don't really know though. Could have been anything. My mother did some therapy with a therapist. It was through her insurance. There was no form to fill out. It was like selected for her, and she had a very bad experience. The person was trying to argue Christianity to her, to my mother, who, and you know, the therapist knew that my mother is an ex-Muslim atheist. She's saying the solution is Christianity. I don't know. I don't think that's good.
It has happened. It has happened. She's not the only one. I've heard people who've gone like, yeah, I couldn't take therapy in Egypt because they'll just go like refer me to a sheikh or something. We had a Muslim therapist at Faithless Hijabi. It was somebody I personally knew and knew that, you know, she had done her master's, etc. So we were in some ways raised very similarly and very liberal. And I always checked with the person, like, we're very small. We have this one therapist. Are you okay with her being Muslim or not? Just let me know. Have a first call with them. If it doesn't work out or if there are any issues, she will. And I told her in advance, like, there could be people who are like, I'm just not comfortable after like session X. For the most part, I think it went really well. And maybe in some ways she did become more critical of her own beliefs or very maybe open-minded. But yeah, we did have a Muslim therapist, and I was very clear about like, you know, you cannot do this. And I've known her, so she knows me in the sense like she knows what I stand for. Like I'm a very loud ex-Muslim, or was a very loud ex-Muslim in my community. Like everybody from Tanzania to Kenya to Canada to UK know my name, like in the community. So it wasn't like people couldn't talk to me or like my profile. So her working with me put her at more risk than not working with me, and she was willing to take that risk. Yeah, so you know, she knew what she was getting into. Like, you know, that was like bad for her reputation. Like, you know, she was getting criticism, she was getting abuse because she was working with us. And she was very strong in like, my job as a therapist is to support people, no matter what their religion, no matter what they believe, whether I agree with them or not. And that was also like very, I guess, good for me in the sense of like finding that belief in like people can separate this, or people can have that, you know, can work without being offended. Like in my day job, I work with Christian apps. I don't like it. I don't love it. I've had interesting stories from the clients, and I'm like, and sometimes they'll go like, "Are you religious?" I'm like, "No." I'm like, "Is that a problem for you?" And they're like, "No." I'm like, "Okay, this is my job. I get paid. You get your subscribers." Yeah.
All right. So is there a final point you guys want to make? We're way over, by the way, but nothing was stopping us, so we kept going. You guys have anything else you want to say to the audience, to specifically people that are might be looking for therapy?
I don't know, Aisha, maybe you have some final words. I feel like I've talked out. So it's okay.
Oh, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, well, I mean, hopefully people are now aware of your services and my services, and they can kind of reach out if that's helpful to them. But also, I think, like just to touch what Zara has said, if you're someone who has been thinking about therapy and you've kind of been on the fence and it's within your means to access therapy, maybe take this almost as your sign of, okay, now actually reach out and be intentional about getting the help that you want, because you've got nothing to lose by trying. Even if you go to one session and you think that's not for me, you don't have to keep going, right? You've got nothing to lose, but absolutely it's an investment in yourself and it will help you. I don't think anyone's kind of ever come away from therapy and been like, that was a total waste of time. Even if you have a bad session, it's like, right, I don't want that therapist. Let me find a different one and get the help that you need. So yeah, I think hopefully people might be inspired to look for the help that they need after watching this.
I hope so. And that was part of the purpose of all this. Yes. Well, thank you for joining us. And thank you everyone else who's still here and watching. And hopefully we see you all again next year for the second anniversary of Uniting the Cults. And Aisha, I would like to ask you to come next time to talk specifically about your because by the way, your face and your name and your organization, none of it was in any of my material because it was late that you got added. So maybe next year.
That's okay.
I did yell at him.
Yeah, you did. You did.
No, that's okay. Do you know what? My therapy was actually taken down. I've had a new one only go live like 2 days ago anyway, so you probably wouldn't have been able to find my website, so don't worry about it.
So it was a lucky happenstance. Yeah, a sign from the universe.
But I guess you'll be posting this separately maybe as well, just as its own segment. So
I will, yeah. Every one of the 5 things will be separate. Yeah.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, it was awesome. This whole thing was good, and now my butt is hurting, and I need to stop just from sitting. Yeah,
you and I both.
Yeah. All right. Well, bye everyone, and thanks for coming. See you next year.
All right. Bye, Aisha.